All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Athletistry Ballet Evolution. My name is Shane Worthner, and I'm your host. And today I'm going to do something a little bit different to the previous episodes that we've been doing, where I have posted a Q&A request on my Instagram, and I've gotten some interesting questions. So I've decided to choose 3 questions that I will answer on this little podcast. And we will dive into them, and I'll go in depth into the answers and the questions. And what I want to do is start doing this every week or so. I'll put up a Q&A once a week, a Q&A block in Instagram. You can also drop the a question on YouTube if you go and watch us on YouTube. But basically, I'll choose 3 questions every week from things that people ask me, and I'll go in and I'll answer them in depth. And hopefully through that, I can help you guys more by understanding a little bit more in depth on what I can do on Instagram, or the kind of more short form content that I create as well. So there were a lot of questions this week about strength training and conditioning and well-being for dancers. Obviously, that is something that I take very close to my heart. I think it's important for dancers to take care of their bodies and to train properly and to make sure that they stay healthy and well. But also strong in the sense that they need to do extra cross training. They need to make sure that their bodies are well conditioned. This also brings up some interesting thoughts for dancers, because strength training is often aligned with this idea that, if we lift weights, we'll get bulky, or we won't have a dancer's body anymore, or our teachers will be unhappy with us. We won't look like ballet dancers because we put on all this muscle from the strength training that we're doing, which is couldn't be farther from the truth. So before I get into the questions, I just want to bring up a little meme that I saw the other day, which was basically thinking that lifting weights, it was like one of those quote memes, and it said, thinking that lifting weights will make you bulky is like thinking that driving a car will make you a NASCAR driver, right? Like there's just no way that, first of all, you're doing the amount of work that you need to get to that level or that result as a dancer, because you're predominantly not going to be spending a lot of your time in the gym. The gym is there as a support system. It's not there to bulk your muscles for the way that you will be training. So it's highly unlikely, unless you're going in and doing hours upon hours and very hypertrophy based programs, that you'll get bulky. So let's jump into these questions. The first one that I want to get into, the question was, what is the most important thing to do each day for your body as a dancer? So this is a very individual question. I don't think that there is one specific answer to this that will give you, like, this is what everybody has to do every day as a dancer. What may help, now this is like an exercise that you can do, is to assess your effort. Okay, now this is something that I think a lot of dancers, if they started to use this more consistently, they would be able to see rise and fall in how much they're working, and potentially even see some red flags around injury before they get there. So potentially, maybe the most important thing that a dancer can do for their body every day is to assess just how much they're working and what kind of effort they're putting in. So how do we do this? How do we take that gauge, that awareness around what we're doing on a daily basis? What you can do is you can write down your schedule for the day. So let's say you have class in the morning, and then you have a rehearsal, and then you have another rehearsal, and then maybe a performance. And what you're going to do is write down what you're doing, so the amount of hours that you're working for each of those classes, and then a perceived rate of exertion. So a perceived rate of exertion is basically you thinking about how hard you worked, how tired you were afterwards, and then taking that on a scale of 1 to 10. There are more specific ways, more exact ways that we can do that. If you have a fitness tracker, you can look and say, how many calories did I burn during that class? How much, how high was my heart rate? And you can write that stuff down as well. So you're kind of taking a more specific metric based on something that's tracking that. There are even things that track recovery more specifically, so that you can see that on a daily basis as well. All of that can help, but this is an easy way to do it if you don't want to bring in those extra fitness trackers. So you write that down for the day, and you do that every day for the entire week. And then you look and see, kind of average out what your average exertion was for the week. So, if you ended up with, like, I don't know, 7.5 out of 10, and then the next week was an 8 out of 10, and then the week after that was a 9 out of 10, you can see that if you continue on that path, you're not going to be recovering very well. You're probably going to eventually burn out or cause injury because your body's just working harder and harder and harder and harder and harder, and you're not getting the recovery that you need. So this leads obviously to recovery, right? Like if you're working a lot and you're overexerting yourself all the time, and you keep going and you keep going and you keep going and keep going, eventually you will burn out. You'll get to a point where your body either forces you to take a break, especially if you don't take that break on your own. So your body will force you to stop if you are pushing yourself to a point where you can't handle it anymore. And it may be something as small as getting sick, or it could be something as huge as a major traumatic injury due to fatigue, or even chronic injury due to fatigue. So that leads to the next part of this kind of formula, if you will, of what the dancer needs to do on a daily basis is recovery. You need time to rest, guys. Now, recovery doesn't just mean crawling into a ball and going to sleep for 3 hours. Recovery can be making sure that you're getting enough hydration. It can be making sure that your electrolytes are balanced. It can be doing any type of therapies that you need, whether it's physical therapy, myofascial release, massage, cold plunges. There's all kinds of different therapies that we can use to help the body to ensure that it's recovering properly. Eating enough food, like your body needs fuel. You wouldn't be able to drive your car past a certain point if you didn't go to the petrol station and put fuel back in it, or if you're driving an electric vehicle, charge it up, right? So you need to make sure that your body is getting enough fuel to sustain it. That's not always going to be the healthiest option, but it does need to be calorie rich at the very least, in order to make sure that your body is getting enough calories that you're not running on empty, because that won't last for very long. And again, you're going to over fatigue and you're probably going to end up with problems. Okay, so all of these things stem from knowing how much you're doing. You can't appropriately understand how much you need to recover if you don't understand how much you're working. And so tracking your progress, tracking your effort, tracking your recovery, I think is probably one of the most important things that dancers could be doing daily to make sure that they stay healthy and well. Now, let's talk about training, because the next question here is, what is a balanced cross-training schedule for injury prevention? That's a good question, and again, it's going to depend heavily on how much you're doing and what level you're at, and whether you're a professional, whether you're a student, how old you are, how much training you do normally on a weekly basis anyway. If you're already doing 40 hours of dance a week, you're not going to want to add on another 10 hours of cross-training in the gym. It's just not feasible for your body. You will end up not being able to cash those checks physically. So how do we do that? So we again, following on from that first question of tracking, we need to know how much effort we're putting in. We need to know how much recovery we're getting. And any cross-training that you're doing, especially for injury prevention, should be there as a way to maintain and protect the body. So you're not wanting to go into the gym and smash yourself for 2.5 hours. And that includes going on the treadmill for an hour. At some point, guys, especially if you're doing steady state cardio where you're running on the treadmill, you're going on a bike, or you're doing something like that for an hour, you're putting so much strain on your body, plus you're burning so many calories that you're just going to need to eat more or rest more. Your body's just going to say, I need to sleep, or I need to eat. And so what's going to happen is you're going to end up, again, more fatigued, and it's probably going to end up with more injuries, right? You're going to overtrain. So you're better off doing shorter stints of exercise. Like if you're wanting to improve your cardiovascular output, especially for a pas de deux or a solo, you're better off training in relation to what intensity that solo is. So for example, let's say you're doing a pas de deux, it's a 10-minute pas de deux, and you have to do 5 minutes of adagio work, a minute of variation, and then a 2-minute coda. What I would do is 5 minutes of moderate intensity, 1 minute rest. 1 minute of high intensity, 1 minute rest, 2 minutes of high intensity, 2-minute rest, and then do that again. Okay, so you're kind of building your cardio ability in relation to what you're doing in dance. Strength training is going to be heavily related to what you're doing in dance. So if you're finding that your knees are sore, but you're not able to get into a deep plie because you're in pain, then potentially what you need to do is find ways to strengthen your quadriceps so that your knees are not in pain, so that when you're in class, you're not favoring that muscle group because of whatever pain is caused. So finding a balanced cross-training schedule is very heavily going to depend on where you are currently. Now, if you're finding that you're training 30 hours a week in the studio and you're rehearsing and you're performing and you're doing all this stuff, you're not going to want to do too much. You're really going to want to, by taking that metric of how much you're working and where you have injury or potential markers for injury, and say, okay, these are the things that need to be rested and these are the things that need to be strengthened to make sure that that injury doesn't come around. And that can be discussed with a trainer, that can be discussed with a physio, that can be discussed with a doctor to help you to figure that out. And if you don't have those medical professionals on board with you, you're going to struggle because you're just not going to have the understanding, nor do you need to, especially when you're starting out, because your focus is dance. Like, your focus is getting better at your skill and putting the best on stage. So really what you need is a team of people behind you helping you in that process, guiding you with appropriate exercise, guiding you with appropriate volume and intensity of exercise, helping you to progress that, knowing when to taper. Okay, now this is an important concept because a lot of dance companies, actually I don't actually really know of any dance companies that properly taper their dancers before peak performance. So what that means, when we're leading up to an event, a competition, a performance, an examination, generally speaking in the sports science world, what will tend to happen is they'll build you up until a certain point and then they'll taper off your volume. So they'll pull back on the amount of work that you're doing so that you are able to recover enough to have your peak performance hit right at the time that you're going to be in that performance. Now, what companies do, what ballet companies and ballet schools and pretty much all of the dance world does, is they push and they push and they push and they push and they push harder and harder and harder right up until the day of the show. And generally speaking, you're going to have another 2 to 4 to 6 weeks of performances after that. So it's not like you're going to get suddenly a rest. You're going to keep rehearsing, you're going to keep pushing, and you've been pushing so hard right up until the show that your body is already fatigued before you have to go into this really stressful performance period. So the way that I look at it is preseason, right? Like, if you're starting a season and you're starting rehearsals, while the rehearsals are still light, add in more cardiovascular and more strength training. So do more at the beginning of a rehearsal period. As the rehearsal period ramps up, slowly start to pull back on the strength training. So don't cut it out completely, but pull it back a little bit each week as the rehearsal period progresses and gets more intense. And then when we get to that point where we're almost at the performance, so like 2 weeks before the performance or the exam or the competition, you want to really reduce the volume of exercise quite considerably. So if you know that your rehearsals are about to pick up a lot, basically pull back the amount of stuff that you're doing in the gym, the amount of stuff that you're doing in cross training, by about 50 to 60% if you can. Okay, so you really want to drop back as much as possible with the volume. The intensity needs to stay relatively the same because we're still trying to keep that high level of performance. You're just not going to be doing it as many days a week. So maybe 1 or 2 days a week instead of 5, right? Like, if you had started with 5 days a week going to the gym, pull it back to 1 or 2. Because you're still wanting to train, you're still wanting to keep your body moving, but it's a way that you can control the amount of effort that you're putting in. When the company continues to ramp up your work, you can control that by saying, well, I'm going to pull back on my own stuff so that I am well recovered enough to get through this performance season. And then when the performance season is over, you go back into the gym full steam ahead and start to progress again. That way you're maintaining your body, you're not getting injured, and you're allowing yourself to have peak performance when you need it and then rebuild after that. Now, this is the last one that I want to talk about, and I kind of touched on it at the beginning, but this is so important. This question comes up all the time. And there are parameters, guys, that will allow you to achieve what you want to in the gym without getting bulky. So here is the process. The question is, can you gain strength without doing a bulk and gaining muscle mass? Absolutely. There is going to be some hypertrophy as you get stronger, okay? Because we do want to develop muscle. Muscle supports our joints. It absorbs force. It helps us to get off the ground when we're jumping. It helps us to lift when we're lifting. It helps to support our body and protect our joints. There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be building muscle. Does that mean that we can't have a nice, long, lean, aesthetic line for dance? Absolutely not. In fact, some of the strongest people I've ever met are not bulky, massive bodybuilders. They are lean and just really powerful, strong people. Now, how does that work? There are different ways of training. So the basic way to put this is we can train for endurance, muscular endurance, we can train for muscular hypertrophy, and we can train for muscular strength. And we want to have a slight combination of all three as we go through, but again, it's going to depend on the phase of your training and where you are in that process. So if you're just getting into the gym for the first time and you've never done any gym work, you may want to do a little bit of hypertrophy just to make sure that when you start to lift heavier weights for strength training, you're not going to injure yourself trying to lift those heavier weights. So hypertrophy basically means the thickening of the muscle fiber or the cell that creates the muscle. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you're making more of them, but you're actually increasing the volume of that cell, so it's getting bigger. That's where bulk comes from, is when we hypertrophy enough, the muscle looks larger, we look like we've created more bulk. Now, that can also be impacted by lighting, that can be impacted by body fat percentage. So if you have a lower body fat percentage, we will see more muscular definition, which can in turn actually make you look more muscular. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make you look bigger, but having a lower body fat percentage can actually make you look more muscular. When we talk about things like hypertrophy training, we're looking at rep ranges of anywhere from 8 to 12 reps for 3 to 4 sets, and then doing slow eccentric work. So the contraction, the element of the work that we're doing, let's say for a squat, let's talk about a squat. We have concentric, eccentric, and isometric contractions. Isometric is when the joint doesn't move, but the muscle is still engaged. Concentric is when we are working against gravity, and eccentric is when gravity is assisting us. Okay, so if I'm doing a squat, the eccentric phase of that exercise would be lowering down towards the ground, and then the concentric would be pushing back up. So if we're doing hypertrophy-based training, we really want to lengthen that period of time that we're under tension during the eccentric phase. And that is going to increase the damage to the muscle, so we get little tears, and then as the muscle rebuilds, it rebuilds and it rebuilds larger. Okay, that's not necessarily going to build strength. You can do that, you can get massively large muscles and still lift moderate weights. Okay, so it doesn't mean that you're going to be lifting really, really heavy weights. The way that we build strength is a different process. So we actually have to work with heavier weights for less reps with more rest time. Okay, so you're thinking maybe 3 to 5 repetitions, 3 to 5 reps, but we should be pretty exhausted by the end of those 3 to 5 reps, and then we want to take a 2 to 3 minute rest. And you can do one exercise, one compound exercise a day. So you could do squats one day, you could do deadlifts another day, you could do bench press another day, you could do overhead press another day. Now this is a more advanced way of lifting. It's not what I would recommend for your first time in the gym, but if you are specifically wanting to increase your ability to contract your muscles, so the amount of strength that you have, this is the best way to do it. And it doesn't mean that you're going to get super bulky, it just means that you're going to be able to move more weight. I've seen plenty of people who are not excessively massive bodybuilder type bodies that can lift much heavier than I can lift, just because they have trained specifically to lift heavy weight. This is not the only way that I would suggest training for dance, because it does limit your endurance potentially. So I would do this maybe 1 or 2 times a week if you're really wanting to increase strength in a specific part of your body, and then add in some endurance work. That endurance work is going to be higher repetitions, lighter weight, and you're going to do 2 to 3 sets of that. Okay, a lot of endurance work tends to work more towards time-based training, circuit-based training, as opposed to set rep-based training. So maybe 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, working as quickly as possible, challenging your cardiovascular system, and not lifting heavy weight. Dancers tend to train this way a lot anyway, because they don't generally have access to weights in the ballet studio. So a lot of the quote-unquote strength programs that studios implement are actually more endurance programs. So they're improving the endurance of the dancers. At the same time, you do too much endurance training and you increase the potential for overtraining because there's not as much rest. So you're pushing. Your body can only take so much of that, and it doesn't necessarily have the time to recover because dance is very similar in its modality. So when you train like that in a quote unquote strength class, and then you go back into ballet and you're doing the same things in your performance, it actually potentially increases the risk for injury. So my recommendation is have 1 or 2 days of endurance, have 2 to 3 days of strength, and then if you're wanting to have a little bit of hypertrophy, you could do a couple of weeks. You could microphase your training. So you could do small blocks, 2 weeks of hypertrophy, 2 weeks of strength, 2 weeks of endurance as well. There's lots of ways we can approach this, but it is definitely possible not to bulk to the point of a bodybuilder, especially for women. It's not going to happen easily, and even for most men, it's not going to happen because there is a huge element of food as well. So the amount of food that you would need to consume to put on size would have to be excessive. And generally speaking, we just don't have the time to eat that much food as dancers. And I'm not saying don't eat. We have to eat enough food, but we just don't have the time generally to do that. And you probably wouldn't feel very well either because you need to feel like you can still move and have the ability to exercise most of the day as dancers. So our calorie burn is quite high. In order to make up that with a calorie surplus would take a lot of calories to do. All right, so I hope this answers your questions, guys, around some of the more controversial strength and conditioning stuff. Get in there, track your training, track your workload, track how much you're doing. Learn how to do that in relation to your training so that what ends up happening is when you get to a performance, when you get to a higher stress period on your body, you can pull back on some of the outside cross training, and then it can support you as opposed to breaking you. And then use your cross training in a way that is actually going to enhance your dancing, enhance your physical ability through strength, through endurance, and potentially even a little bit of hypertrophy, not to make you massively look like a bodybuilder, but to help your muscles support your joints. Anyway, guys, this has been Athletistry Ballet Evolution. Thanks for listening. See you next time.